Most fantasy tropes treat your home as a safe zone, a place to rest and heal. But in traditional Slavic folklore, your house is a shared lease with a supernatural entity. If you miss your rent payment of bread and salt, that entity will gladly destroy your life. If you're a world builder or a game master, mapping Tolkien-style elves or standard tabletop demons onto this world breaks the lore. These aren't creatures categorized by neat moral alignments. Instead, you're dealing with animistic risk management. Every entity operates on strict, unforgiving contracts. To build an authentic world, you have to throw out the idea of monsters waiting to be slain. You need to negotiate with volatile landlords and heavily armed ecological wardens. This rigid system comes from the reality of pre-industrial Slavic life. Survival here meant balancing on a knife's edge. A single bad harvest meant starvation. This constant threat created a state of dvoirie, or dual belief. When Orthodox Christianity arrived, the ancient animistic practices didn't die out. The peasants simply merged them. They prayed to the saints for their souls, but they kept paying off the local forest spirits for their crops. In this worldview, every single space, the dark woods, the river bend, the hearth, possesses a living consciousness, and that consciousness demands behavioral compliance before it yields its resources. This is a quadrant chart mapping out these entities. Rather than judging these spirits by how they look, we evaluate them by plotting their functional domains against their threat levels. Pinpointing where an entity sits on this chart dictates how you predict its behavior, survive its tests, and write it into a narrative. We start at the absolute center of human civilization, the home, specifically the warmth of the traditional stove. This is the domain of the Domovoi. Appeasing the Domovoi requires specific inputs. You maintain strict household cleanliness, you avoid domestic arguments, and you leave regular physical tributes like bread and salt. If you comply, the Domovoi acts as an elite home security system, protecting your livestock from disease, and will literally knock on the walls to warn you of an impending fire or a death in the family. But the penalty for breach of contract is severe. Neglect the house or disrespect your relatives, and the Domovoi triggers his demonic aspect. He will tangle the horse's manes, smash the pots, and deliberately kill your cattle. This relationship is highly legalistic. If you move to a new house, you can't just pack your bags. You have to formally invite the Domovoi to come with you, often carrying embers from the old stove to the new one. Leave him behind, and you lose your protector entirely. The Domovoi proves that in Slavic lore, humans never truly own their homes. They co-manage them under a strict behavioral lease with a volatile roommate. Step past the village edge into the deep woods, and you enter the territory of the Leshy. He is the shape-shifting master of the forest. Looking at our chart, the Leshy moves high up the y-axis into the wilderness domain, but stays firmly centered on the x-axis. He is highly transactional. The inputs are straightforward. Enter the forest with deep respect, ask permission to forage, and leave your first catch on a stump as a tax. Pay the tax, and the transaction pays off. You get guaranteed safe passage, abundant mushrooms, and protection from bears and wolves. But the Leshy is strictly utilitarian and easily offended. Show arrogance, whistle loudly, or disrupt the woods, and he treats that as an actionable offense. The penalty is terrifying. The Leshy will mimic the voices of your loved ones to lead you off the path. He will induce a lethal disorientation, making you wander in circles until you starve to death. Surviving this hex requires a bizarre, highly specific cultural countermeasure. You take off your clothes, put them on inside out, swap your shoes around, breaking his navigational lock. The Leshy functions as an active, heavily armed bureaucracy that demands absolute adherence to local laws. Finally, we reach the most chaotic environments in the Slavic world: the deep rivers, the swamps, and the dark mill ponds. When we plot the water spirits on the chart, they slam into the extreme top right corner: maximum wilderness, maximum predatory risk. Here you find the Vodyanoi, a malevolent, bloated manager of the waterways. He wants you to drown to serve as his underwater slave. The input ratio here is pure extortion. Millers and fishermen must offer massive bribes, throwing black roosters or even horses into the water, just to stop the Vodyanoi from smashing their dams. And sharing this space is the Rusalka, the embodiment of the unclean dead, often the souls of the unbaptized or those who drowned. They have a specific threat window during early summer when they leave the water to hunt, luring men to their deaths. Unlike the home or the forest, the water sphere's input-to-outcome ratio is terrible. It represents the raw, untamable danger of the Slavic landscape, where negotiation rarely works and avoidance is your best strategy. The architectural rule of Slavic folklore is clear. The closer you are to the hearth, the more negotiable the spirit. The further you go into the water and the wild, the more predatory they become. To integrate this mythology without breaking the lore, we can use a simple rubric. For writers, use the Domovoi to inject domestic tension, making house safety depend on the family's internal relationships. When characters enter the forest, the Leshy functions as a powerful, neutral arbiter that tests their manners and resourcefulness. And stop using the Vodianoi or Rusalka as standard combat encounters. Frame them as lethal environmental hazards, bypassed only with specific cultural knowledge, like tribute offerings or inside-out clothing. By throwing out generic monster tropes and properly mapping these entities by their transactional domains, you immediately elevate a standard fantasy setting into a deeply authentic, psychologically complex world. To effectively use Slavic folklore, discard the binary of good versus evil. You must embrace the gritty mechanics of animistic survival and risk management. Look at your current creative project or campaign. Which of these transactional spirits are you going to drop into your world to raise the stakes? Let me know in the comments. But these localized operational rules are just the beginning. What happens when this same logic is scaled up to a god-level, kingdom-wide threat? Click the video on your screen to see our definitive breakdown of Kashe the Deathless and the architectural genius required to defeat an immortal villain. I'll see you there.